startup kind of culture and mentality on the teams that you're building to get to the best work. How do you do that in complex companies?
It starts first with really asking for the space that you need to be able to make decisions, empower your teams. And many times I just lay out that I understand the problems. I might have maybe an unconventional approach to how I might go solving.
This is Inspiring Women. I'm Laurie McGraw, and today I'm talking with Tracy Byers. Now, Tracy is the Global General Manager at IDEXX Laboratories. She's been there for just a couple months, and as far as I can tell, Tracy, in your entire career, you only work with big tech giants. You were an amazing leader at IBM Watson. You were over at Optum. You were over at Change Healthcare. You were at Philips for many, many years, and now you've actually taken a bit of a pivot in terms of moving your technology, your AI, your digital innovation career to IDEXX. I'm looking forward to talking to you about that. Tracy, thank you for being on Inspiring Women.
Thank you so much for having me, Laurie. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Great. Well, Tracy, let's dive in. So, where I want to start, just looking at your background, you are a finance major, you have an MBA, and then you have this decades-long career as a technology, med tech, AI before AI was cool, leader, transforming businesses. You've seen all kinds of tech transformations. How does a finance person become such a tech powerhouse that you are?
I think it's kind of a funny story, but my dad was an engineer, and in our basement, he had a metal machine shop that rivaled most professional machinists. And it was a hobby. And, I spent my childhood hanging around lathes and drill presses and Bridgeports. And the funny story is I wasn't allowed to drive the family car until I could change the oil, change a tire, and do a brake job. But what that taught me was just being curious about how things work, being curious about logic. And, as I spent such a big, chunk of my career in healthcare, it was sort of trying to figure things out. The truth is, I went to Lehigh undergrad to become an engineer, but I didn't quite have the chops. So finance was the next the best thing. If I couldn't figure out how machines worked, at least I could figure out how a P&L of a business works. So that's kind of how I ended up there.
I'll tell you, for me, like the big thing that in tech, it was like a moment, not the growing up around it, but it was a fifth grade moment when my fifth grade teacher was introducing a lesson on engines. And she sort of looked at me, the smart student, and was just like, well, you're not going to be very good at that. I was like, are you like, excuse me? So, but exactly. So you know how to make a business work. That's for sure. You certainly know how to make engines work as well as all of those things. But I mean, we're talking about giants here: GE, Hewlett Packard, Philips, IBM Watson, Change Healthcare, Optum, and now you've chosen IDEXX Laboratories. So you're moving into a different kind of space. What does all of that previous tech experience, transformation experience, why did you choose IDEXX? You're just getting into it.
Yeah, it's probably a great question and maybe looks a little funny from the outside looking in. But, I think first of all, I spent a big chunk of my career in med device. And at a certain point in my career, actually at Philips, I realized that the problems, particularly in the US healthcare, but true across the globe, ultimately all came down to data. And I really began to hold this belief that data and software were going to be the unlock of being able to sort out how we could improve healthcare system, lower cost, drive efficiency and ultimately improve outcomes. And so from that point forward, I really sort of followed a software path. And when IDEXX called, it was really about running their software portfolio. And they too are largely a diagnostic or equipment business. supporting the veterinarian practice, and they're building their software platform and portfolio because they think it enables a much better experience for both the vet and the pet parent. But the truth is that from a filter standpoint, when I look at opportunities, I kind of look at three things. One was impact, not to be too altruistic, but can I make an impact? Do I have a set of skills that will help the team, will help the business, and will help the industry? And when I think about, healthcare, whether it's dogs and cats or people, maybe a little bit of a different scale, but nonetheless, I felt like that was a very mission driven impact. The other thing is that one of the things I experienced at United Healthcare and Optum is that when businesses get to be that large, their pace of innovation, their decision making, really gets pretty complicated. And
Yeah,
I realized that my skills and frankly my impatience that's probably grown over my career, is better suited to a smaller environment. I mean, make no mistake, IDEXX is a $4.5 billion company, and so
right.
by many people's definition, not small at all. But coming from United at 450 billion, significantly smaller, and I felt like it had for me the right mix of agility and desire to empower and make decisions quickly, and also some stability in terms of scale. The second thing I always look for is people and culture. I am a very people focused leader, always have been. My imprint came from my early days of Hewlett Packard, which really created, in my mind, what good culture looks like. And I've taken that through my entire career. And then just the challenge, I think just wanting to take on tough problems and kind of circle back to what I said at the first and to be able to make an impact. So that's kind of what led me. I had formerly at Hewlett Packard worked with the CEO of IDEXX. And so I had a personal connection. And as we know, so much of what happens in life is your relationships and your network. So, but I love it. It's a great company.
Well, I'd like to talk about sort of like, like all three of those things, actually. Let's start with the hard problems thing. I think that, as many people just, have different experiences along their careers, the solving the hard, gnarly problems that are out there with both experience, but also new things that that you have to learn. I mean, because like the best ideas are coming from sort of, some of the things in the Wayback Machine, but also the what you can see in the future. So what are some of those hard problems that you're looking to solve for that interest you, that drew you to IDEXX?
Yeah, so I think the one of the hard problems is that and this has been true in a couple of different industries, is when you're dealing with a very fragmented industry like vet practices, which largely, are small, one, two, three vet practices, individually owned, that your ability to reach them and your ability to also their level of business sophistication about what they need in order to grow their business, or drive efficiency. And I think, reaching that audience and meeting them where they are on their journey, meeting them where they are and what they need in order to, implement software solutions as an example. And the other interesting dynamic, which makes it also very complicated, is like dental and my previous life in radiology, there's a dynamic of consolidation happening on the provider side where venture capital, private equity are coming in and buying up practices and consolidating them. So now you have a huge portion of the market that's independent, practices, and then you have a section that is corporately owned. They have very different needs. They have very different, levels of sophistication about what the problems they're trying to solve. And that creates just complexity, whether it's go to market complexity, product development, and prioritization of features. And so all of those things make it, challenging. And just also at what pace can they accept and adopt new innovation like AI? And
So are you
been,
saying in the vet space there's consolidation
there
going
is.
on as well? Oh, real. So tell me about this because I remember reading or just like the size of the pet industry was
Yep.
in and the amount of like dollars that people are willing to spend on their pets has just exploded in the past, decade and a half. And I don't know if the pandemic that made it worse, but just it just I was just surprised. I don't know anything about this industry, but it's just like it's quite enormous is what I understand. So I imagine all of the, vets and other things that need to care for these pets.
Yeah, so 10 weeks in, I probably don't have all of my market stats as I probably
Come
should, but
on,
what I
you're an
will tell
expert.
you,
I know you're an expert.
no, there are 33,000 vet practices in the United States. And the part of the portfolio that I'm responsible for is the practice management software. Not a lot different than sort of an EHR or, a private practice people medicine software that does everything from billing to scheduling to results and so forth. And um, but you're right in that the total addressable market for vet spending in general is massive and it's growing. IDEXX has it exceeded 10% growth every year for many years. And so it's
Wow.
been an incredibly successfully run company. And that's just because they're well run in the industry and number one, from a market share perspective, but also, like you said, the industry is exploding. There are also some other kind of interesting dynamics. There's no, uh, the personal health information, constraints, the regulatory constraints, don't exist. And so their ability to test different solutions, is easier and faster. In general, you're right. People, both COVID certainly increased the number of pets owned, but people's willingness, I think in the United States, people are having fewer children. And I think sometimes what we see is people are sort of investing those resources in pets as if they were
No,
their pseudo children.
conversation with someone they were talking about like their cancer treatment
Correct.
for their pet and
Right.
again listen I want to be really clear like when someone has a pet like the amount of just emotion that is put into that relationship is a lot and it is changed. It's just materially changed. I mean it's back from the days of just like okay, where's the dog? I don't know. Outside for the past 3 days. Haven't seen the dog. It's very, very different. But as a leader, Tracy, you are known as a leader who really invests in people, bringing the best out of people, and that's part of just sort of like how you are known. You talk about sort of like you can get the best of individuals when they are growing, and also what I know about you is that you like this startup kind of culture and mentality on the teams that you're building to get to the best work. How do you do that in complex companies? Because when they're large and you've worked at some of the largest, that is much easier to say than actually to make happen.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I'm certainly not perfect at it, but I think it starts first with um, really asking for the space that you need to be able to make decisions, empower your teams, and many times I just lay out that I understand the problems. I might have, maybe an unconventional approach to how I might go solving. And, in fact, my boss here at IDEXX, I said to him, look, you and I are going to probably violently agree on what's wrong, but we might violently disagree on how to fix it. And I think that just comes down to sort of my skills, sort of my tools that I know work for me, and they might not work for somebody else, but I really look for space to be empowered to make decisions. And then I then hand that to the team. And I work hard at the beginning to really build trust. I think that so often people are in environments where they don't trust everyone around them, whether it's the team they're on or the team that they work for. And so, it's spending a lot of time understanding the team dynamics as sort of the first step to then kind of run through brick walls together. So,
Well, let's maybe, yeah, it's early days at IDEXX, but maybe let's look at some of, again, these giant, technology companies that you've been at where you've been CEO, you've been general manager, you've been transformational leader, you've led technology transformations from cloud to native to cloud and other AI. How have you built teams and what's evolved? Because we're now in workforces where there's 5 generations of people who might be working there, how they show up. We're remote, we're not remote, we're hybrid. So there's a lot of different dynamics today. The technology of how people work together today is changing, and we're all adopting AI in uneven but pretty rapid pace kind of ways. So maybe like what are things that have worked in the past that you're confident will still work today in terms of building teams? And then what are some things that you're doing differently today because of changes that you've seen over leading different types of teams?
yeah, I think two things. I think one is it reminds me of I had spent a bulk of my career at Hewlett Packard and then Philips. So Philips acquired Hewlett Packard's medical business, and I was on the acute monitoring side of the business with defibrillators and so forth. And I was progressing in my career, getting more and more responsibility and getting put into, development programs. And they approached me about an executive, my first executive level position to run the MRI business. Now, in the terms of sort of, med device, MRI is pretty darn technical, lots of PhDs and physicists running around that modality and quite technical. And I said, well, why would you want me to run the MRI business? I mean, I don't know the difference between an MRI and a CT. And they said, oh, no. We have confidence in your leadership style. We want you to do it. Well, little did I know, they just, because it was third in the marketplace and not doing that well, they couldn't find anybody outside or inside that wanted to do it. But that all said, what I did was I just first went with some of the subject matter experts that were, salespeople, technical people, support people. And I spent a bunch of time just learning the product and getting some confidence that I knew how it worked. I knew what problem it was solving for the customer, like at personal level, like I understood. And that started to bring me just some credibility with the team so that if I were giving them ideas about leadership or giving them ideas about, coaching people on their teams, that I was bringing some level of credibility. And I also am super authentic and transparent. It's just part of who I am. I don't know how I do it, but I just, I get told that a lot. But I think that I I've sort of relied on those as kind of early things that I do that just get me confidence and credibility to then, lean in. I think the second thing that happens is that I'm very comfortable sort of admitting about what I am good at and what I'm not good at. And some of the ways I demonstrate it is I am, perfectly comfortable to say I need somebody who's better at engineering because that's not my domain, and I need the best software leader out there. Or, I had an operations leader at Optum, and he was just phenomenal. And I just always loved that the combination of our two skill sets was sort of Wonder Twins power. And I just think that knowing what you're good at and knowing what you're not good at is particularly important when you're tackling hard problems. I think you asked me sort of what adjustment have I made, and I think the the pace and speed of technology that has happened, particularly in the last few years. I mean, it's almost funny to think that it was almost 10 years ago that I joined IBM Watson Health to learn
Yeah.
about machine language and large language models. And I remember thinking, gosh, what the heck is this? And who's Watson and what can they do for cancer? And, and now here we are 10 years later and it's just exploding. You and I mentioned before we started just about even, ambient listening and, how you use that sort of application of AI in a doc office or a vet office. And those things, for me, have sort of tested this concept, which is no matter how fast and hard you run and try to keep up with some of this technology, you're never going to be the expert. And I think getting really comfortable, sort of saying, okay, who's out there that knows more than I do? And bringing them in. And, that's been true at IDEXX when I think about, I may not know the vet industry, but I do know leadership and I do know software and I do know, healthcare generically. And so I just think always thinking about how do my skills or how do the team skills sort of match up and where are the holes and not being afraid to go fill those with somebody who's way better than you.
Tracy, when you talk about that, like there's a level of just innate confidence that comes with that. You're known for your first podcast appearance ever, which was getting comfortable with being uncomfortable. With the way you're talking about it, though, there's nothing about it that sounds uncomfortable. And for many women who are progressing in their careers, being uncomfortable at anything is not a place that women, generally speaking, like to sit. They over prepare. They'll do more work than most to not be in a space of not knowing. So can you just like dive into a little bit that like being comfortable with being uncomfortable? Because most people aren't comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Yeah. Look, I think the honest answer is when I was in my 20s and my 30s, I probably wasn't that comfortable being uncomfortable. The older I get, the more sort of, the more I embrace I am who I am. I am a mom. I am a daughter and those things are real and I don't want to act like they don't exist. And so, but that comes with just getting more comfortable, sort of later in your career. Um, I still am uncomfortable though. I like to give my team confidence, and sometimes I don't have all the information. And I would say that that's been particularly true moving into this brand new industry and wanting more than anything, I don't want to look good. What I want to do is help my team be successful or help the business be successful. And the way I think that leaders do that is making decisions quickly. And when you don't have a deep, well informed gut to do that, it slows you down. And
Yep.
so I've gotten pretty uncomfortable, you know, of late just about my ability to make decisions quickly. um, I think the other thing I would say is, uh, this is where culture is really important. I think finding a culture where um, there is a great acceptance of diversity. I have said to, so many leadership teams, I love diversity of thought. I love when I'm an extrovert, probably can tell that, but I'm just an extrovert. And so I like to think out loud. And one of the best things is to have, team members who you can kind of spar with and test your logic. And well, why do you think that? Or I assume this. And I think some of the most enriching conversations happen when you are surrounded by people who do think differently. Analytics, not, there's just so many different dimensions to diversity in my mind. It's not just gender diversity or, cultural diversity or so many other kind of more common, but just diversity of thought. And so I've just always cultivated that. And I think if you get comfortable with it, then, and confident, which again, I know comes with time, it's an asset. And I think, I'd be remiss if I didn't say, I just got really, really lucky, Lori. Hewlett Packard, Phillips, I never once felt like my gender came into play. Doesn't mean that I wasn't aware of it or that there weren't implications, but I didn't feel like it held me back. Now, I am aware of, for example, emotion. I think sometimes women can be thought of as being overly emotional. And so I have conditioned myself and worked really hard to make sure that when I hear information, that I really temper my reaction, my facial reaction. I really work hard to sort of process through. And I think that that's some conditioning about knowing that I can undermine my credibility if I allow myself to react emotionally. And sometimes I need to go do it in private or,
And it's hard.
um, it,
It's really hard, particularly when you are sort of like putting your everything into what you might be working on. And there's a lot there. And I do think actually just, a couple things. You made the comment of like when I don't have like a conditioned gut, a learned gut about something, that's when I seek out other things. That just is actually really interesting to me because I think leaders today generally we're in such an environment of change that there are so many things. We don't know what the future is going to be because we're building it. We are literally building it in all of our various functions, and you don't have the tried and true of what has worked before is going to be the thing that's going to work today. So just like that comment and like giving, I don't know, like a words and agency to that reality to then how do you process and lead through that? That's super interesting. The other thing that you were just mentioning, and this is particularly, I think, true for women. I don't know if it's like I actually I don't know if it's like women are emotional, but that you understand that you need to learn how to show your emotions differently. Not that you don't have them, but that you show them differently so that you can lead more effectively. That's super interesting. So there's like so many different things in what you've just been talking about. So
no, I love being a woman leader. And, like you mentioned before, whatever I can do to pay it forward and help pave the way for other people to, find a path that works for them.
well, let's just touch on that a little bit, Tracy, because I do have to vehemently disagree with you on this idea of I've just been lucky. I don't believe that for any successful woman leader out there. I believe that's created circumstance, and not that there hasn't been some fortune, there, but the opportunity to create the culture, to participate in creating those environments is something that I'm quite confident that you have done a lot of. So, in that idea of paying it forward, what are some things that you do today so that other women leaders don't have to learn things that you might have learned along the way? Because I just feel this urgency to accelerate more women forward in their leadership paths. So, what are some of those things that you do or coach on or advise others that have worked to help them not have to do it, how you might have done it?
Yeah, I think that, I've got a number of women, including my own daughters, who are going through the process of starting a family. And they do so and have this commitment to their career and navigating sort of can they do it? How do they do it? And so I spend a great deal of time making it okay to talk about the challenges. I have an amazing woman who works for me here at IDEXX who, has two young children under the age of probably 5. And, I have said to her, um, you have to, at 5 o'clock, because she has a commitment with her husband and family to get home. Um, I said, you just need to get up and walk out. And you don't need to apologize. And you don't need to text your husband and say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I'm going to be late again. I said, I want you to get up and walk out. And my point being is, I'm just in a different place in my life. And so, I might sit here and chit chat till 8 o'clock at night because I just have adult grown children. And so, anyway, my point being is that I really try to kind of open up the dialogue to say, okay, if you're committed to continuing your career, here are some things to think about because it is hard to do it all. It's, sort of the Martha Stewart of, motherhood, which I felt some pressure when I was having a child. It's crushing. And I think, the heck with that, get rid of that and draw the boundaries and try to create a space where you can still be really good at your job and create the boundaries. I do it also with men who work for me that are going through early family dynamics. I have a funny story where a guy who's now, got his children are adults, I think, but he was working for me and his wife had chosen to stay home. And they'd just had the new baby. And he said, yeah, my wife is staying home, which is great. And I said, can I give you a piece of advice? And he said, sure. And I said, just remember, every day you have the opportunity to get positive feedback, encouragement about the work you do from other people other than your spouse because you're in a work environment. And I said, remember that your wife now, you're the only person to give her feedback about the job she's doing. And oh, by the way, it's a really long feedback loop before you find out whether you did a good job as a parent or not. And I said, so just keep in mind every day when you go home, like remind her about the things that she's doing great because you're it. You're the only person who's going to give her positive feedback. And he probably 20 years later came to me and said, I just want you to know that was like the most important advice anybody had ever given me. And, I feel like those are the kinds of things that you just have to be really honest with about this is the real stuff when you're trying to do work and you got to be true to yourself and you just also have to make boundaries so that you can actually be who you want to be.
And that just sounds, first of all, that's an incredible story. And I think we'll close out this in fantastic, inspiring women interview on that. But that, just like sharing something beyond the professional workspace and showing up for your team members to, allow them to be not just the best leaders at work, but in their whole life. That's just really, really impressive, Tracy. This has been a great, inspiring women interview. I've been speaking with Tracy Byers. And Tracy, thank you so much.
Well, Laurie, thank you. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate the time.